Welcome, everybody. Gonna give it another minute or two for people to keep rolling in, and then we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here. Okay, we got a few folks still rolling in, but I'll go ahead and kick us off. Welcome, everyone, to the Distilled Spirits Council Ask the Expert webinar series. I am Ross Mulcairn, Director of Member Services and Business Development at the Distilled Spirits Council of the U.S., also known as DISCUS. We are recording this webinar, so that will be available later on in our member portal and on the DISCUS YouTube channel. For those of you who don't know, DISCUS is the leading voice and advocate for our members and the distilled spirits industry overall. DISCUS provides a wealth of resources and services, including this webinar series that aims to educate and to share relevant trends, ideas, resources, discussions, and opportunities for our members and for everyone across the industry. I want to welcome our speaker for today's webinar, Unlocking Cash and Value in a Challenging Spirits Market, Alan Barbet, founder of Validate Advisory Services. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you for having me, Ross. I'm very happy to be. Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Very happy to be here with you and with the DISCUS members and others that are joining this call. We're going to talk about challenges and opportunities, for the companies in the industry that, are faced with a challenging environment. So I'm very excited about this.
Well, for those who don't know Alan, he is former CEO Americas of Pernod Ricard and worked with Palm Bay International and Philadelphia Distilling, and has now founded his own consulting firm, Validate Advisory Services, and is going to walk us through his experience and what we can all take away. Now, Alan, you've spent decades in the beverage alcohol industry working in various roles for small and large companies, and now with your own consulting firm. Now, I know we've talked about some of the recent changes that you've observed in the industry. What prompted you to develop, today's presentation, and why do you think it's particularly relevant for everyone tuned in now?
So I think that it comes from two separate observations, Ross. And so I kind of wanted to share some of the thoughts that I've been having for a while on that topic. So, having DISCUS be helping with that communication is great, and I hope it'll be of help for those on the call. The first observation is, every day pretty much we see through our newsletters and information that, a number of companies are going through rough times, whether it's acknowledged or when it's published. And so I thought, my goodness, there's really a lot of headwinds happening. And then in the last few years, I've been working with clients and companies in the space, and I realized that there's still a lot that you can do before things get really bad. So I thought, well, I really should talk about my experience, and it doesn't have to be an extraordinary type of work. I think that if we think about discipline and focus, when things get rough, I think it can bring a lot of positive outcomes.
Amazing. Now, let me just pull up. I think we have some slides for today's presentation.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I think I'm gonna. Can you see my screen? And if I go here, does everybody see the full slide?
And let me just. It's seeing the full PowerPoint, not just there it is.
Okay. Cool.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get started, and we'll talk about, as the industry has become more challenging, what are sort of the issues and headwinds facing the industry today?
So, one of the things that people are asking is, is this a secular decline or is it cyclical? It sounds like it's secular. My modest view is that it's actually cyclical. It's just maybe that the cycle is going to be longer, but generally speaking, I'm very bullish on the industry. I think that beverage alcohol in general is about getting together, celebrating, those are not being replaced. So I think it's a temporary adjustment. The environment is changing really quickly, so there's definitely a lot of learning, but I believe that it's just a temporary change. It's like telephones from 20 years ago. We never replaced telephones; they just became different. So I think that because beverage alcohol is so much about conviviality and connection, I think that it's going to be just a tough but cyclical situation. That said, there are plenty of headwinds. They're real. I know that most people on this call are probably very familiar with what's going on. So change of consumption. I'm not actually sure that it's a lot of moving away from alcohol, but certainly changing from one category to another and trying new things. And there are 100 million cases of RTDs out there that didn't exist 10 years ago. So certainly there's still quite a bit of consumption, but it's just switched around. Affordability is another issue. I think that it's every day it's become a political topic. People are looking at what they have in their bank account, and sometimes they're making decisions about buying alcohol or not that may be going against the what we've seen in the last couple of decades. Distributor consolidation, big obstacle, certainly separate from what we're seeing, and beer distributors coming in and traditional wine and spirits distributors having certainly a lot of consolidation issues, RNDC, et cetera. And plus, they're sitting on a top of a ton of inventory. So I think it's also going to be a concern for everyone and on the supply side. Inflation seems to be higher for companies in the space, aluminum, glass, etc. And in general, it's a higher cost of doing business. So it's really tough, and you add a bit of geopolitics on top of that, and it's probably a time that we haven't seen in several decades.
Of course. Now, as you've talked about sort of some of these signs, I'm sure there's all sorts of warning signs that these brands are looking at. What are the sort of earliest indicators that a company may be heading towards some sort of financial upheaval or struggle that they can try to get ahead of?
So obviously, when things go well, no problem. Sales are up, and you've got visibility to the future. It's obviously when things get to be uneasy and starting to be very difficult that you have to be careful and quick. And that is true for any size organization. I had an ex-boss who used to say problems don't age well, and I kept that with me because it's so very true. And that's not just for work. It's true in anything that you encounter, that check engine light on your dashboard. It's not going to go away on its own. The leak on the second floor is not going to go away either. So same with companies, in this space, by the way, or others. So some of the things that people should be paying attention to: inventories, kind of the first big red light. They go up everywhere, and that is not a good sign. And it's sometimes obvious, but some companies just are not really paying attention to that. Gross margins tighten, and that's also something that can be masked when sales are good. I have a story of many years ago. We at Pernod Ricard, we launched a brand called Seagram Vodka. Pernod Ricard had acquired a number of Seagram's assets, and Seagram gin was big brand, but there was no Seagram vodka because Seagram was distributing Absolut. So we launched in 2003 or something like that. Seagram vodka became a huge success story. Problem is that we were selling it at a price point that was very different than what we had been selling Seagram's gin, and within a few months we realized that we were losing a lot of margin, and those are the things that we started to work on If you drop 5% in gross margin on $50 million in sales, that's immediately $2.5 million in cash that you're missing. So pay attention to that. Credit use across the board, right? Maybe it's your bank line of credit, maybe you're opening credit card balances. I've seen that where maybe smaller companies start to open 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of credit and pay for stuff with that. Not a good sign. And of course, not paying your accounts payable and having that piece grow, also a telltale sign. Sometimes you don't get the right message. When you're a leader, sometimes your financial communication doesn't come across. Maybe your accountant doesn't really read the information the way that it should be read. There might be warning signs that being missed. The accounts are fine. Everything looks like it's jiving, but there might be some important information that's not really being looked at. And then, among teams, there could be also a lot of optimism. I used to ask people when they were presenting, future outlook, if they had done a little bit of a, arithmetic, easy trick. It's you look at the what your growth or decline has been, and then you say, okay, in the next whatever 4 or 6 months, you're telling me that you're going to change the direction by 1 or 2%. When you do the math, it means that during that 6 months period, you might have to do +4, +5, +6. Doesn't make sense. So just be sure that you're asking the right question on that. And then I think that the industry. I was at an event last week in New York, and there's a bit of groupthink. And people are saying we're okay. And sometimes some of the people who are in that room actually are very much okay. But when you hear that, you say, it's not so bad. Reminds me of that joke about the guy who was falling from the Empire State Building and saying, so far so good. So just have to pay attention to what's around you.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, I meant to mention this off the jump. We will save some time for Q&A at the end. So anyone who is tuned in, please submit your questions in the chat or the Q&A box. Feel free to send them in as they come to you, and we'll get to them at the end, or write them down on your end and on your side, and we'll address all those when it gets to that point. Now, Alan, next, I know you mentioned here, a lot of this positivity, and next quarter is going to fix it. I know a lot of companies focus on, sales growth when their cash is tight. They're saying if we just sell more, that'll get through it. I know when you and I were talking before this, that's not sort of your first instinct. What is sort of the beginning step for a management team, and some, practical actions that a company can take to improve that cash flow other than just sell more?
So that's a great question, Ross, and indeed, a number of companies try to, and it's fine, right? It's something that you also have to do, but don't try to buy revenue. Don't try to get out of your maybe recent slump, just by trying to sell more. Generally speaking, it's probably not going to be the best way forward. My view is that if you're seeing signs of trouble, then you really, except maybe in other industries such as AI or tech, where the money is just flowing in, I think you just have to really be concentrating on where you're going to find some additional cash flow, some ways to get yourself in a better place. And the more you wait, the more difficult it's going to be. So, big picture, receivables, in our industry, I think that it's usually not the pain point, but I've seen instances of, because it was not really worked on, where you have millions of dollars in money that should be coming to you from your distributors. And then at the same time, they are not paying you because you owe them DAs and other distributor charges. So there were also time to come in and say, how about we do a clearing between the two? I owe you $5 million in DAs and, other marketing expenses. Meanwhile, you haven't paid me $10 million. How about you give me four, and then we figure out, how we're going to take care of the rest. Your inventory, if things are not working that well, that means you're sitting on a lot of inventory, and it's everything, or finished goods, dry goods, liquid. And so there are two pieces, right? You have made this inventory, or you bought it, and right now you can't do anything with it because it's not going out. So you really need to do something with it. And at some point, if you're not selling it, maybe it's actually better to destroy it. I know it sounds a little strong, but if particularly if, as probably a number of people on this call, you've got some type of outside warehousing, those probably like $5 a case, or something similar for what your if you're finished goods, or and liquid is different story, but better to destroy the inventory that you cannot sell. Liquid, probably a little different, probably a market out there, and don't hesitate to sell something that you bought for one at 50 cents, if that can bring you some cash that you need somewhere else. Suppliers, yes, paying them late is the go-to, and sometimes when companies are really tight, they don't pay their suppliers at all, or the ones that they think they're not going to use. I think that if you work with them, particularly the bigger one, you can really get further. You get extended terms, maybe even at times you get supply lending. Some big companies, for cardboard packaging, even glass, will work with you and give you some, because they know that you need that support. So that's something you can investigate. And also, just to not be caught by someone who's going to say, nope, I'm not shipping because you're not paying me. Obviously, try to have, depending on your size, but don't get stuck with one supplier. Because that allows you to get better terms, and B, you're not going to get stuck, not being shipped for reason X, Y, Z.
Makes a ton of sense. Now, I know we've talked before, and you've always been known for thinking about fixed assets not being the end all be all, thinking differently about that. What do you mean by rethinking your fixed assets?
So it's been a pet peeve of mine, across different companies and industries. I think that in general, the industry tends to be asset heavy. I think it's the tradition of making, whether it's wine or spirits, and wanting to own everything. But my view is that fixed assets should be lighter, should be sold, or should be really sweated out. I have another story about wild turkey, and some of you on the call know that it went through different lives. At Austin Nichols, which Pernod Ricard acquired, then it went to Campari. But when it was for about probably 20 years or so with Pernod Ricard, everyone at Wild Turkey in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky would come and say every year, we need to invest in this and that, and new equipment, and new machinery. And yeah, my boss at that time, I was the CFO for the US, and he would say, no, we're not going to do that. And everybody was very angry, and they would be like, well, it's going to break down, and we're going to have problems. And we had inventory. We were not going to no longer be able to produce. So we just would say nope and oh, and they would go back and try to figure it out. I think that's kind of a in our industry, particularly now, it's something to keep in mind. There's always opportunities to sell your fixed asset and get rid of them when you need the money. It's equipment, it's real estate, it's land. You focus on what you really need to own. I saw today that WhistlePig, I think, was selling their real estate. They probably are looking at it and saying, I think it's Vermont and New York, and saying, well, maybe we don't need that. So my challenge to people on this call is that you probably shouldn't have the kind of assets that your books are showing, because they are actually costing you money, and you would be better off with cash in the bank. If you look around in many other industries, big companies, and even smaller ones, but when you think about Apple, when you think about Marriott, when you think about Uber, they don't own their fixed assets. I'm sure they do have some, but Apple doesn't own factories. Marriott doesn't own their real estate, and of course, Uber is using other people's cars to have an amazing business. So, in some ways, something to look at very carefully. Do you really have the right return on investment for your fixed asset? And then, if you're really looking at ways to, monetize what you have, maybe you have other things, intangibles that you have not thought of, brand names, logos, recipes, trademarks that are sitting somewhere, and you own them. Your company created them at some point or another, and you thought, oh, I'm going to launch this, or I'm going to leverage, that brand, or again, that intangible, and it's not happening. Maybe there's someone out there who might be, interested in buying it. So just look at it very, very carefully as well. I've done that again with several companies, and even if you have a smaller brand, right, that's not like you have maybe 5,000 cases, 10,000 cases, and it's something that it's not really your main business. Someone might be interested in buying it, and boom, now you come back into a much more positive situation.
That sounds amazing. We love finding a little cash between the cushions. Now, as we're talking about assets, I'm going to go out on a limb here and assume that our next slide is going to be talking about liabilities.
Indeed. Indeed. And I call it as assets in disguise, right? It's probably, if they're accounting people on the call, or financial people, they go like, that's not the case. And, one is one thing, the other one is another thing. But my point is that if you're looking at ways to, find yourself in a better place, obviously assets, as I just mentioned, is the first way to go. But in general, companies don't like liabilities, right? That's the stuff you have to pay for: banks, suppliers, taxes. But even there, I think that there are ways to work with those, and not just delaying payments. Not paying your taxes for a while is not a good idea. But there are ways to, not pay $1, but pay maybe X many cents, 50 cents, 70 cents, and you talk to every one of those entities. And I've seen being done, in different situations. And this is before, you get into a legal environment, bankruptcy, etc. Chapter 11, Chapter 7. It's really before that, way before that. You say, okay, I have 100 to pay to one of these entities. What can they do for me? And I can tell you that in many situations, including banks, they will work with you to avoid a crash later. A few weeks ago, as we tend to be a little bit older, in my crowd of friends, someone said, yeah, I said, good to see you. And he said, yeah, it's better to be seen than being viewed. And so I think that for the debtors, it's the same, right? They'd rather see you alive than see you in a coffin. So they're going to work with you. If you work the right way, they will make it happen for you.
Understandable. And, when you're thinking about lenders as sort of a source of income, you know, generally the way a lot of other people work is that, they're also bringing on investors. When you're in sort of this a bit of a dip, or you're or more of a rockier road, how are you communicating with your investors and keeping them, happy and on board?
So one thing, Ross, that I've seen, sometimes unfortunately, is that there's not enough transparency. Leadership tends to not want to talk, and it's kind of normal. It's human behavior. Problems happen. You're not going to run immediately to say, I'm in trouble. But at some point, you have to let your investors know, whether it's, your board of directors, your direct investors, people that are, involved with the company. Don't, as I said, don't treat them like mushrooms. They don't want to be in the dark and they don't want to be fed what you know. So talk about the problems. Ask them to help you. It's obviously different if you're the CEO of a global corporation or a craft distillery, owner or founder. But generally speaking, particularly when things are rough, as they are right now, those investors will want to work with you, just like the other entities we mentioned earlier. And they will have maybe good ideas. They know that your company is better, in a better shape than it is now, and they're not going to want to see their money, go away, particularly if as shareholders, they get to the bottom of the list of people that get their money if you really run into bankruptcy or a situation like that. So they will work with you, and in the meantime, as a leader, as maybe as a finance person, you can think about ways to bring money into the company in the form of new equity, maybe merging operations, maybe partnering with someone. And in this case, you're not talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars, you're talking about millions of dollars. And again, even for investors, I think that many, many times they'd rather be weakened in their investment versus not having anything, right? So even if they only have $70 out of the 100 they put into the company, better to have those $70 in a fresh start than nothing a few months down the road.
Absolutely. Makes a ton of sense. And I appreciate your usage of they are not mushrooms. For those who are not entirely familiar with the language that I don't think is appropriate for a Disqus webinar, you can look at the film The Departed, which has where I first learned the phrase and definitely has the full strength version of that one. Now, as you talked about sort of bringing in new money, people would rather have some portion of a living company than, all of one that's not working right now. Where are basically, if you can raise money from your balance sheet and all this stuff, what can you do to sort of make sure that you are in as strong a position as you can be moving forward? Like you've talked a lot about cost management and, looking at your assets, your liabilities, your inventory, all of this stuff to make sure that you're in a strong place. Generally, when you're talking to a company or you're talking to a distillery or a brand, where are you finding the sort of most success? What's the sort of starting point and your greatest opportunities to utilize what you have now and get stronger tomorrow?
Yes, Russ. So I know that it will sound cliche, but unfortunately, that's what you have to do. You have to be very focused on cost discipline, and it goes across everything: people, expenses, sales, marketing, and just look at whether you need to do what you're doing or what you were doing a few months back, a year back. People is probably one of the things that has changed pretty dramatically in the last 3 or 4 years. There's a lot of talent out there. So people are no longer, as fully employed in beverage alcohol as they were, let's say again, 5 years ago. And so there are a lot of people looking to work and maybe work part-time. They're good people. So think about that because maybe you need someone 20, 30% of the time. And maybe the size of your sales organization, or marketing organization, or accounting group could be a lot smaller, but still having some good people, in your group. And then the advent of AI, which for me is just absolutely amazing. Every area of any business now you can go and get better answers. I'm not saying that you can replace people, but there are things that you can do today that you can do even 5 years ago. So again, from that people perspective, I think that that's something that you should be super focused on. My rule of thumb, and across different industries, have done it in wines and spirits, and in consumer goods, and even in payments, because I've worked part of my career in a very different industry. You probably can take 20% of all expenses within 6 months at the very beginning. And if you have already been doing some work in that direction, and there's a way that you can get another 10%. And you might say, it's magic. No, it's not magic. It's just, again, this super focus and discipline. Of course, it comes with emotional pieces. I'm not saying that it's easy, but it's something that if you really practice that type of frugality, I think it's going to bring a lot of good returns. Now, I put here on the slide, be tough, but be fair and smart. Obviously smart in how you approach things. Don't cut yourself your arm and say, well, I don't have an arm, but I'm lighter. It's also about how you do this when you cut expenses and you reduce the size of your organization. I once was with a company where there was a lot of expense cut, and people left, and the organization was not feeling great. And then the CEO came in with a brand new $200,000 Mercedes-Benz, a few days after having told people that they were being let go, and that a lot of harm was being done to the company, and that didn't go well. So it's also about having a heart and knowing how to do it well.
Makes sense. That's I think that's generally a good business practice is don't show up with a brand new sports car right after laying off a bunch of people.
Exactly.
I could imagine that's not good for employee morale, and keeping the team around there. So that's one that I'll have to make sure I'm writing down to remember in the future. Now I know we're getting close to the end of the sort of presentation that we put together here. So again, I'll before I ask my last thing, I'll put out a call now for anyone who has questions or any comments or anything that they want to hear from Alan or hear from us. Please go ahead and submit those questions in the Q&A in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. But I know we have I see some names and faces I recognize in the lobby here as that are tuned in. Alan, let's say someone is seeing a couple of these warning signs that we've talked about of some of these struggles. What's sort of the first step or the first opportunity they should take? What's sort of bullet 1A, as they say, time to tighten the belt and figure out how to get through this?
So I will take it back to kind of where I started. Is time is critical. Recognize problems early. My favorite phrase, right? Problems don't age well. Discipline. Keep at it. Keep very focused. If you want to turn your company around, it requires a lot of attention, a lot of decisiveness, and you can't keep your eyes off the prize. So that's a really big focus. Recognize also that you can't do everything. Whether you're in a small company or a large company or middle market. You're probably driving the company for sales, business development, growth. And so while you see those warning signs and you want to do something about it, get help from people in the organization as much as you can, or bring the right people into your organization so that they can help you manage, first of all, see what's wrong, and then help you make the right decisions. And then, I like small early wins. About 20 years ago, someone gave me a great book, which I've gone back to a number of times, called The First 90 Days by Michael Watkins. And it talks about, what you should do when you start in a new position. This was focused on leadership, but in the first 90 days. And we hear that, in politics, the first 100 days of a president, or because it's super important to get things done quickly, and it's motivating, but at the same time you need to give yourself some kind of halfway goals that you're going to meet quickly. It's like running a marathon, and for those who've done that, you start, if you've not been a runner for ever, you start with a 5K, right? And then you go and you say, I did that. That was great. And you set yourself another goal, 10K. Then maybe you're going to run a half marathon, and eventually you get to being in shape for that marathon, which is yet another step. But every time you get to a place where you have a win, and it doesn't have to be with speed and your pace and whatever. It's about actually finishing. And I think that same thing for a company looking to improve itself. You have to set those milestones and move relatively quickly, right? If you run the 5K in 2026 and you decide to run the 10K in 2028, then you're probably not going to do well in that 10K. But so you go through the milestones relatively quickly. And it's not easy because leader and teams have to do all kinds of other things, right? The turnaround is kind of a side thing, but it also got to be the first thing that everybody works on. So as you get people involved, and as you work on all kinds of other things, including having your own life, right, and your family. But I truly believe that with the right people, the right tools, the ways to go at it, I think that it's very executable. So, there's absolutely ways to get to a better place.
I understand. All right. Well, I noticed something that I want to call out for everyone at the bottom of this slide, which is that if we were having these, if you were any of these questions or problems sound familiar to you, please reach out to Alan. His email is here at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching this later, or for some reason lose track of this slide or that in the email, reach out to us, membership@distilledspirits.org. We'd be happy to connect you with Alan or any of our other partner members who'd love to be of assistance wherever we can. Now, again, I want to tell everyone, if you have any questions, please go ahead and drop them in the chat in the Q&A. I'm going to go in with a couple of questions that I have and start to pull from a few here. Now, Alan, I wanted to say something that I know we've talked about a lot of options and opportunities here, but usually when I think about this kind of stuff, one of the things that jumps out to me is sort of the opposite side, is what are kind of the biggest mistakes that someone sees. So if someone's in this position and they say, great, I've followed all of Alan's lead and I'm in this position, I'm going to go to this stuff, but I'm going to take the next step. I have this other idea. Are there any sort of warning signs or mistakes that you've seen people make?
Kind of a bit what I said through the presentation, Ross. People may sit on a problem, right? And I'm not saying that they're ignoring it, but it's, like the warning light on the dashboard. It's like, okay, I know I got to take care of it, but, I've got to drive, I got to get places. And so, sitting on something is just one of the problems that, because it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better 100%. The other mistake, which I've also seen, and sometimes it's hard to see how, founders, CEOs, people leading organization find themselves in that situation, is what I call believing the fairies. because there's been a good time. There's been, we all know how consumption and beverage alcohol did during, the COVID time and kind of, that period 1922 thereabout, that it's, going to stay that way. And you've got people in the organization saying, yeah, we're going to make it happen. And whether it's by, not fear or just, being super optimistic. I think that believing that you're going to have an exit through strong growth is a mistake that you should really be paying attention. And then, not getting help. So it's a little bit different than sitting on it. It's not bringing in within your organization, because it's you can also have people who you say you're going to be really looking at this particular part of the organization. Maybe it's your production people, maybe it's your accounting folks. And again, if you can't, if you're not big enough, or if you think that your people have really a lot of other things to do, bring in someone. I think that the return on someone, I'm not just saying someone like me, there are plenty others, but will be, great return versus just not doing anything, or not bringing the right people in.
Totally makes sense. It's especially as you talked about in that don't listen to the fairies bit, and that it's you know, if we would just imagine that everything in 19 to 22 was going to keep growing, going to keep going up and up and up, and nothing's going to change. It's also a good reminder that right now, the industry is not in that same position, but that doesn't mean that every trend and everything moving forward is going to keep going the way it is right now. You have to plan for what will come and get ahead of that, and be prepared. So that's a nice reminder there. Now, we did have a question coming in from the chat from someone, especially on the smaller side. They specifically mentioned, 50 to 100 cases a month, looking to sort of to still grow, because that's really on the smaller side for a lot of our distilleries. So like, how would you recommend they sort of take some of these approaches that you've talked about and look to grow, because they still need to bring in more assets to expand beyond that side as they look to, tighten their expenses and make sure that they're careful.
I think that while the outcome, right, the harvest from some of the recommendations that I mentioned earlier are going to be smaller, because there's just smaller size, fewer of those assets, fewer of those liabilities, smaller cost of operations. I think the same discipline and focus should be there. And so even with a relatively small size, there are ways to, bring costs down, to be more profitable, to be more focused, even in terms of, portfolio, for instance. I think that if from a growth perspective, there are certainly other people who might have a better sense of what can be done. I've done it in different ways, but don't also try to grow just for the sake of growth. I think that some growth with great margins, and very focused on what you have built, can be good enough, versus trying to go out there, buy the business, get into 50 states, and have the organization to do that, and pay people to expand, and again invest in things that you may not get the right return for. So focusing on what you're good at, even for a small organization, I think is the answer.
Yeah, growing the correct way at the correct pace is, better than just chasing growth for growth's sake.
Absolutely.
I like that. Now, one other thing that I just wanted to, run by, because we got another question here. As we think through, companies large and small, and all the different people who are in there. And I really like that something that you mentioned a second ago about seeking help, even from inside the organization in terms of all the different folks down the line. When you think through a company, with their CEO, CFO, the finance team, the production team, the outside investors, their lenders, who is generally spotting some of these problems first and is able to make this turnaround or a tightening or a sharpening or an efficiency building most effective, and getting to that and sort of spotting that problem earliest and addressing it head on.
So that's a good question because in a number of circumstances, again, smaller companies, mid-sized, $10-20 million in revenue, but also much bigger ones that have either led or be part of. When you find a situation that really requires attention, it's clear that whoever was in that position before and the team that was taking care of it didn't look at this and say, "Oh, we have a problem." So certainly, whether it's CFO, CEOs, CFOs, founders, boards, PE firms. I've worked with a number of private equity companies, and while they were seeing some of the financial numbers, they just were kind of also ignoring some of the signals that I mentioned earlier. So you hope that it's going to be your finance team, your CFO, your controller, your maybe even an outside accountant. But I would just suggest today, because of the strength of something like ChatGPT and others, you get a PDF of your financial statements at whatever time, and you feed it to ChatGPT and you ask, how is that my balance sheet and P&L looking? You'd be amazed at the type of answer that you get. So even if you're not the financial type, just ask for those financial statements from your accountant and feed it into ChatGPT or Claude, and you'll get some really, really pointed answers and very interesting ways of particularly comparing one set of numbers to another. I'm really impressed. So even if you don't have people within the organization, I hope you do, but now seeing the problems is not the end of the story, right? It's then having a group of people that are going to bring change around, and you got to be, as a leader, whether it's a team or full organization, company, you're going to have to be leading that desire to change things, particularly when there are some, again, emotional pieces attached to it. But it's you got to make things happen. Seeing is one thing, executing is another. And in many organizations, small and large, people talk about change, whether it's top line or bottom line, talk about this is what we're going to do, and you put project management teams together, and 3 months pass and nothing has happened. You got to change that view and really make sure that the people that you're hiring, again, internally or externally, are going to help you get to those milestones as discussed earlier.
Of course, that's a great point. Now, as we've talked about sort of managing all of your assets and everything, I do want to make a quick plug for those of you who are managing aging product in barrels. We are having another Ask the Expert webinar 1 week from today with our friends at Proof 8 that are doing a lot of interesting work in barrel management, and we will be dropping in a link to register for that in the chat for those of you who want to be here. And I've got to say, Alan, we're getting a lot of love and warmth for you in the chat. Everyone's very impressed and very excited. So if anyone has any last questions, please feel free to send them in now. If you send them in after we're over, feel free to send them directly to Alan or reach out to myself or anyone at the membership team, and we're happy to connect you with Alan. But I want to say thank you to everyone who has been here, who has tuned in. Alan, I want to thank you for your time. We really appreciate you stepping up and answering some questions and offering a lot to our members. I know you've had a wealth of experience in the industry, and you're a great resource for us and for everyone here. a true expert for our Ask the Expert series. So thank you for being here.
Well, Ross, thank you for having me, and of course, thank you to everyone who was on that call. Ending on an optimistic note, I think that the world that we're in, the beverage alcohol and spirits in particular, is not going anywhere. I think that we for 5,000 years it's been a world of relationships. It's been about having people being with people. No one's celebrating the birth of a daughter with a Coke or an iced tea, right? No one is going to sign a big deal and then have a glass of seltzer water. So I think we're here for the long term, and we're not being replaced. And so, rough times maybe for the time being, but very, very optimistic for the future.
Absolutely, I love it. So, and again, something that you mentioned earlier, and that I've heard kicking around, we are still the industry of conviviality. So, I want to say thank you for that. Thank you to everyone who's tuned in. This recording will be sent to everyone who registered in the coming days, and we look forward to seeing all of you next week and at all future Ask the Experts and at all future Discus events. So, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we look forward to seeing you around.
Thank you.